Welcome to World of Marketing Podcast, a Foster Web Marketing production. Here's your host, Tom Foster.
Hey everybody, it's Tom Foster in the World of Marketing, and here I am with my own Dr. Sendi, Dr. Christopher Sendi. Now, Dr. Sendi and I, how long have we known each other now? For
about a year and a half.
about a year.
It's about a year and a half, I think. It's been a long time.
It's been a long time. This guy saved my life. Now he laughs every time I say it, but it's true. So Dr. Sendi is an addiction specialist, and I will tell my story real quick, and then I want you to tell yours because I want to get them all interested.
All right.
A lot of everybody that's going to listen to this podcast, they know me, and they know that I've struggled with alcohol addiction for most of my life, and I've had an addiction to marijuana, but really alcohol. And that's when, I've gone to AA and I've gone to all those programs and all that stuff, and I just got fed up. Nothing was helping me, and I needed help. And I actually did the old Google search.
How'd that turn out?
I found you, and and that's kind of a funny story because I do not do his website, everybody. So don't blame me when you go there and you see that mess, because that's all him. But he did come up page one for it, and I ended up calling him, and wow. For the first time, I went in and met with this man. And it was just a fantastic thing. I mean, he listened to me, he understood me, and it was an approach. It was a scientific approach, I'll say. And it's just been a fantastic. And he's cured me pretty much. I mean, he's cured me. And it's not been an easy road. We've, made some adjustments along the way, and I'm on some medication, but I'm the happiest I've ever been when it comes to my addictions. And it's because of this man right here, Dr. Sendi. So thank you so much, Dr. Sendi.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. And I'm glad I could be there. And I really appreciate you having the faith in me to actually reach out. That was awesome. And it's been actually, you've been absolutely awesome as an individual. So again, everything has been fantastic.
Well, thanks for saying that. Now, when I met you, I was blown away because of your schedule. I'll never forget that, because when I met you, because your office right now, you're doing that full time. You got your own business full time. You're doing the addiction clinic. But at the time, you're right by Mount Vernon Hospital in Alexandria, and you were working the night shift in the emergency, in the ER, right?
Correct. For 24 years of night shift mostly, and especially the past 12 years, I never saw daylight during a work schedule except in my office.
Yeah, and you got kids? You're married with kids?
Correct, yeah.
2 boys?
12-year-old and a 16-year-old, and they're growing fast.
Yeah, and you told me, and tell me if see if I remember this, you would go to work, get up in the morning, go for a run when you would get off, right?
Right, correct.
And then go to sleep.
Right, yeah, get about 5 hours maybe.
Get up, go for a workout.
Correct.
Spend a little time with your kids when they got home from school.
Yeah.
And then go to this clinic.
Correct.
Go for a workout after that, and then go back to work at the ER.
Right, all night long, yeah, 9 till 6 a.m. It was quite a journey there. And we were open Sunday, well, actually 7 days a week for a while there, doing that. And then we just kind of started taking the Saturdays off. But yeah, it just didn't end. I was pulling like 300-hour, work months.
So those people that complain about working too hard, cry me a river. This man, I mean, very accomplished doctor and entrepreneur. So as you were doing this, working in the ER, making ends meet for your family and building this business that you've been doing. And tell me, because it's an interesting story, how you got into this, the addiction business. Tell everybody how you got into that.
Well, as a ER physician, especially at nighttime, a lot of cases after 10 or 11 o'clock at night kind of transition into this kind of a murkier type medical scenarios, more chronic, a lot of mental health disorders, a lot of trauma. And so, I kind of was putting all the pieces together. Now, I actually have several board certifications that kind of cover all the preventable health areas that I kind of ran across over the many years of doing night shift. And certainly I could have picked that up during the day shift as well. But at night in particular, especially after midnight, when I really looked around at the majority of the cases, a lot of them had to do with trauma from drug-related events or overdoses, which was really a big thing in the past 10 years. And then also, as far as, people falling in the nighttime, elderly ladies falling in the nursing home, people just, having accidents in the nighttime, or certain types of blood pressure or sugar-related issues. And a lot of those could be traced back to chronic alcoholism. And so there's a lot of medical damage accrued over many years of drinking, whether you drink continuously or just periodically. Each time the individual does that, they wind up with specific kinds of medical conditions, whether it's going to be liver related or numbness in their hands and feet. And so there were all these different targets that I just could never put together, because the individuals would never really reveal the fact that they had a drinking history or a drug history. You would just see them in the emergency department complaining of specific things like tingling in their hands and feet, or random falling for no reason at all, or again, issues with trauma of other natures, car accidents, persistent vomiting, and then the mental health part of it was, about 3 to 4 in the morning, it was fairly typical to have individuals come in because they couldn't sleep and they were having panic attacks. And that's when the rest of the world is completely silent. The individuals are left to themselves with no external stimulation. There's nothing going on except their mind is running and racing after, a day's, use of drugs, alcohol, whatever it might be. And so that was kind of how the evenings fulfilled themselves. And so slowly over a period of time, I recognized that all of these conditions, about 80% of it, was very preventable. And in addition to the fact that when you look at the statistics, alcoholism, for example, causes about 60 to 70,000 deaths per year, but not in a sudden fashion. It's in a stepwise fashion. Every time the person drinks or goes through a period of drinking, they actually accrue, elevated blood pressure, stroke potential, cholesterol changes, liver damage, and of course, brain damage as well, effectively over time. And so, in those types of scenarios, they might not have a significant medical condition when they first see me, but rather just a trauma from falling, after a night out. But then after the years go on, they begin to be more and more debilitated, whether it's going to be weakness because the alcohol kind of takes their muscle strength away, or whatever it might be. And then from the other side of things, it would be like opioid addiction, cocaine use. And what we would see with those are some individuals, and this was something which during the opioid epidemic in particular, when prescriptions for pain medications were very common, a lot of patients would come in for complaints of inflammatory bowel disease, or basically difficulty with gut emptying. And then a lot of people would come in with just persistent nausea and vomiting, which actually represented withdrawals, but they wouldn't tell us they were withdrawing. They would just come in and say, I've got gastroenteritis. And somehow morphine corrected that problem. And so, all these different things, just represented about 80% of everything that I did after the hours of 11 o'clock at night. And so if I looked at all the rooms, and if there were 20 rooms filled, literally 15 to 16 of them would be preventable conditions that basically had been happening over many years. And so with that, I took up this interest in finding ways to really correct, that type of situation. And my background is internal medicine and emergency medicine. I'm boarded in both areas. And so from the internal medicine side, I'm always thinking of preventative health care. And emergency medicine, we're always kind of being more reactive. The event happens, they come in, we just take care of the problem, and we send them on their way. But I felt there had to be a better solution for this, that there had to be a long-term solution to get people feeling a lot better, because a lot of things that drive use disorders can be mental health disorders like depression and anxiety and loneliness and grieving, and then poor coping mechanisms that just kind of build up over the years. And so when you bring that all together, each individual doesn't just represent an alcohol problem or an opioid problem or a cocaine problem. They represent everything, including that use disorder, things like, lack of education, lack of support systems, mental health disorders, everything from bipolar disorder to untreated depression to schizophrenia. And then the list goes on. And of course, as these individuals, have less and less social support and personal support, they use more, they actually don't learn new methods of dealing with the bad things that they'll be confronting in life. And so they lose their toolbox of possibilities of really dealing with day-to-day events. And so that's when they come to our emergency department and seek out help, is when they finally use their last tool and the toolbox is empty.
It's very interesting. I wrote down a couple of notes, what you were saying. You said 60 to 70,000 deaths per year based on alcohol. We're having this conversation during the pandemic right now, the COVID-19 pandemic, where we're at 80,000 deaths just here in the US.
Right.
And, we've shut down the country. The world is shut down due to this. However, we're on a consistent 60 to 70 deaths per year for alcohol, yet the alcohol industry is chugging along and marketing itself away. And what's interesting, and you and I have talked about this, and you said it also about social support. And I want to talk about that we'll talk about opioids and cocaine and all that. And I think that's a different world, but just alcoholism as a social drug, where we're pretty much brought up young, that, you're in high school and college, and most of us are like, hey, it's cool to drink, and it's definitely marketed. And, you watch the commercials, and, all the best looking people are out there drinking, and it's all the alcohol commercials are, if you're not drinking this, you're not cool, and this makes you cooler. And you get to a certain point where, as long as you can hang, everything is wonderful. But you get beyond that point where you can't hang, and then you become a pariah of society. You and I have talked about that. And that's kind of when people are like, whoa, oh, you can't handle your alcohol now? Now we don't really want you in this world anymore.
Right.
And that's a mental thing that happens. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So what you're saying is so very true. When you're younger, individuals have different susceptibilities to becoming an alcoholic or any type of use disorder. In fact, addiction is a pediatric disease. It generally does not start after the age of 25. There are rare cases when it does, but the primary source is in the young age group, usually in the age of 13 to 15. When they experiment with alcohol, that's an extremely dangerous time. And so the chances of becoming an alcoholic, if you're drinking, even once a month, somewhere around 50% if you're 14 years old. And as you get older, around the age of 21 or so, it's about maybe 10% if you have moderate drinking levels at that point in time. A lot of that has to do with brain development. Our brain effectively develops from the back of our brain to the front. And that frontal part of our brain is what we call the prefrontal cortex. It's the CEO of our brain. It's what allows us to make good decisions and plan things out appropriately and kind of interpret the world for what it is. And the problem is that when people start drinking, even experimentally at a young age, they actually damage that developmental process. And some have the genetics that, unfortunately, the wiring goes horribly wrong at that point in time. And so what seems like a funny situation in the context of a social gathering, over the years slowly metamorphosizes into exactly what you're talking about, is that the individual who quote unquote can't handle his alcohol suddenly becomes the outcast because he's drinking so heavily that the unintended consequences of that alcohol use begins to be more apparent. And one thing that's very difficult for young people today is dealing with social media and their personalities. A lot of young kids will drink heavily so they can get along with other people, so that they can feel more comfortable with others. It's really a good social lubricant is what it is. And as a result of that, when an individual feels rewarded from doing something such as drinking, and they feel when they drink that suddenly everybody likes them, they're going to want to do it again. So there's a positive reinforcement behind that, and that reinforcement will continue each time. And again, everybody wants to feel good about themselves, but self-esteem is in low, availability when you're in your teenage years. And nowadays, even more than ever, especially with social media, really just kind of putting people under the spotlight 24/7.
So what advice would you give people, or do you give people instead of that? I mean, like, you got teenage boys, that are right in that time period, that 12 and 16 years old, that are prime targets, right? I mean,
Right.
and I'm sure that, go ahead.
Oh no, and you can be an awesome parent, and still the children can have problems, even if you don't have the genetics necessarily in the family history. It really is a combination of things. Now, sometimes it could be mood-related disorders, personality disorders in the children. ADHD, certainly that's untreated and undiagnosed, is a risk factor. But a lot of times what ultimately happens, even in a good structured household, is that the children just end up with other children that take up drinking for various reasons. And so a lot of times it's a combination of things, but it's who the children run with a lot of times that end up modifying their ultimate outcomes. But among the most important things for children is a household that they feel safe in, a household that's structured, a set bedtime, especially because being up past 8, 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night, especially past midnight, nothing good happens after midnight. And certainly all the demons come out in terms of, basically as people don't sleep much, they start surfing the web, they start, feeling things they otherwise wouldn't feel. People tend to feel a lot lower mood at that period of time. And so they will turn to substances a lot of times just to drown those thoughts out. The other thing is that if you don't have a structured, lifestyle in an early age, is that it basically leads to an unstructured lifestyle later on in life. And so you're up till 3, 4 in the morning, even if you don't have to be, simply because it's just what you do. And you sleep later in the morning. And so what that leads to is a lot of boredom time, a lot of downtime. And boredom and unstructured time are the kiss of death when it comes to addiction.
And
that's
devices these days just make things a lot harder. I mean, I agree with that 100%, so getting devices out of their hands, nothing wrong with having that during the day or with some structure, but, make sure they're not having them after a certain point at night, like you said, like 8 or 9, turn them in to you. Don't rely on them to have their own self-discipline. So you're not going to turn that on at 10 o'clock, because their friend might not have that discipline and be, texting them at 11 about some kind of crisis that they're having.
right.
Yeah, I mean, it's a scary time, and the world is working against you. As you said, you can be the best parent in the world with the best intention, and your kid could be a great kid, and but their friends and their parents might not be, and the world, as here we are, the world of marketing, and especially the multi-billion-dollar marketing world of the alcohol industry that has been going on for a long damn time, that ain't gonna go away, isn't your friend. And the sooner that they can get people addicted to drinking, the better off that they are. And it's an unfortunate thing, but it is what it is, and we've got to protect our kids. Now let's move on a little bit into the opioid You know, because that, you know, I work with a lot of lawyers. I've talked to you about that. A lot of them, you know, here we are, uh, kind of, it's very strange because you as a doctor, you understand this, you prescribe medicine, uh, you know, that has been tested and say, okay, well, this has been tested and this is, I've been told that this is what I should be giving for this particular thing. And then years and years and years later, you find out, oh, maybe that's not such a good thing. And then pharmaceutical companies that are making a crap ton of money on these drugs, they're out there marketing it and pushing sometimes, you know, well, oftentimes unscrupulous doctors to be selling more of it in certain states like Kentucky or West Virginia, where there's a ridiculous amount of these drugs being pushed. I've got lawyers that have like massive lawsuits, you know, against doctors and hospitals that are pushing these drugs, Oxycontin and all this business. What do you say about that stuff?
Yeah, so you know, I when I started my practice as an ER physician, it was in 1995. Getting out into the world, and opioids just weren't that prevalent back then until there was a study, you know, presented in the New England Journal. It was just a small little study saying that people can't get addicted to opioids. And that kind of led off into this whole opioid crisis. And you actually, everything circles back to one single small correspondence in the back of a New England Journal. And so, you know, and I've got my little slant on, you know, academia and academic type articles, because I'm not about necessarily entirely mainstream medicine. And this is a problem where mainstream medicine, when it gets involved in things inappropriately, we head down horrible catastrophic routes. For example, the food situation with obesity has a lot to do with academia getting involved in how we should eat. And so they had a grand experiment, and obesity results from that. Then you look at like opioids, and people, you know, again, find that, sure, you know, pain medications help out with pain. But actually, it turns out that pain medications like Percocet and oxycodone and heroin are the best antidepressants in the world for a lot of people. They are the best mood stabilizers. Have a bad day at work, take a Percocet. Kids are fighting, take a Percocet. In fact, you can look back in general media when it came down to like benzodiazepines, like Valium, and there were old advertisements, you know, showing women who were just overwhelmed by their kids, you know, and the article, the advertisement reads something along the lines of, you know, hey, having a bad day at home, take some Valium. And so basically, the thing about Percocet and pain medications is that they serve quite a few uses for individuals. One is, yes, you have pain, but part of the pain process is that we as individuals and human beings are always learning about the situations around us that are associated with pain. So when we have a back pain, for example, and you know, you're having a bad day at work, your kids are fighting, your car breaks down, and you tie that all into the fact that you're having pain, and it's 3 a.m, you know, all you can feel is that pain even worse. You are actually suffering because you're including all the other events in your life into that painful disorder. And you're not really allowing your brain to focus on more important things in your life. And so you turn to things like Percocet and oxycodone simply because they allow your brain to kind of numb itself to the harder things in life. In other words, you lose your coping skills over time. So when you do have a bad day, you don't need to worry about it. You just take the medication and everything's going to be just fine. But the problem with that is that over time, your body gets tolerant to that type of medication, unfortunately. And so you have to escalate dosing because you don't get the same response. And so that's one of the biggest problems with that. And then, of course, then the extra pill supply that then leaks into the hands of younger kids who kind of see it as a combination of things. And for a lot of the kids that are in our practice, they initially experimented with this as a means of just getting along with other people, just like with alcohol. They would go to parties and they would have pill parties with pills from their parents, their uncles, their aunts who had cancer or whatever it might be. And they would all pop Percocet or whatever it might be that's available. And a lot of them felt awesome. They could dance better. They could get along with their friends better, even if they really didn't. But they just felt good in general. And their mood was elevated. They were more motivated. They had more concentration, less fatigue. And they're like, hey, well, this stuff is working awesome for me. It's a prescription medication. Why not take it? Doctors give it. It's got to be safe for you. And so as time passes on, obviously, then suddenly when they try to stop these medications, they get withdrawal effects. And so they want the medication. And then when they get it, they like the medication. But after a period of time, as that tolerance builds up, they just can't quite get enough of the medication to get that same feeling and the same effect they used to have. And so again, there's this ratcheting effect over time where basically individuals can't really connect, how they felt before when they took the same dose of medication. They want to get to that same feeling again because it felt awesome. So they take more and more and more. And then at some point they run out. And then that's when I end up seeing them.
And not to mention but even before that, like if you don't end up seeing them, the other things, the organ damage that it causes, right? I mean, like, and what you were talking about at the top of this discussion with the people that you saw in the ER, that of years of abuse where they would fall, or, like the organ damage, the liver damage, the years of pill, popping and whatnot. And, everybody knows stories of friends and relatives about, people stealing from them, their loved ones or whatever, were in jail because they've stolen or worse, to get drug money.
Correct. So
they're so addicted, so obsessed with these pills.
Yeah, absolutely. What really goes on
ruins people's lives.
Oh, absolutely. People have lost their entire savings. We know people in the local community who have sold everything to try to support these children who are using. They're not children necessarily. Some of them are in their 20s and 30s and 40s. And they lose their savings, and to put them in rehab units, which, by the way, a lot of rehabs don't work because it really just.
Yeah, I want to talk about that. Let's just go right into that. Let's talk about what rehab is all about.
So yeah, and actually, just one step back, basically what's going on when people are using is their minds are hijacked. So the individual who comes into my office who's using I look at them and I'm like, I don't know who you are at this point in time. We need to clear you off the medication, off the drugs, the alcohol, whatever it might be, get you stabilized, and whatever the medical program we need to use, let's use it. And about 2 or 3 months later, if they're able to follow the program, the individual that shows back up in the office is a completely different person.
That's what you said to me. You were like, I don't even know if I'm going to see you again after this. You said that to me. Correct. You were like, most people don't come back. Most people that are alcoholics don't come back. And I was like, really? And you were surprised to see me because I kept on coming back.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? I have to give a hand to you. Again, you totally floored me with your persistence and your absolute commitment to basically getting yourself healthy. And I got to applaud you for that, because let me tell you something. Alcoholism is the hardest disease to kick. And I call it a disease because it's a disease process. If it was a choice, my job would be so easy. I just write a prescription that says stop it, and that's it. And it doesn't work that way, because the bottom line is that when people are using substances, their prefrontal cortex, and again, I'm gonna come back to that front part of your brain, basically, which is where your decisions are made, your insight is given, your executive planning and decision-making is all made, is getting damaged. Every time you drink, every time you use drugs, you're effectively giving your prefrontal cortex a concussion, and you're damaging it. So you make more and more bad decisions as time goes on, which is why you see people who are alcoholics on the side of the road, and they're wearing tattered clothing, and they haven't showered in years, and for them, they're perfectly fine with that. The reality is that their brain has been so far hijacked that they just don't see themselves for what they are, and that's called introspection, the ability to see yourself for what you are. And you'll see this among groups of people where, if you're a designated driver, let's say, and you're with a bunch of other people, and one of them's like, I'm perfectly fine to drive, but you can tell they're totally sloshed. And their inability to say and see for themselves that they're actually drunk, it basically explains what the phenomenon is. Hey, I haven't had enough alcohol. I haven't had enough alcohol. Even if you have, you can't tell that for yourself. Only somebody else from the outside can see it for what it is. And so your brain gets hijacked. And so I've had people come in who, have cleaned up and, from a number of fronts, opioids, alcohol, whatever. And they're like, when I'm using, I'd steal your wallet and help you find it kind of mentality. It's like, they would basically do anything they could to basically get that substance. They would steal from their friends, their family. But again, they would take your wallet and help you find it at the same time, because they just, really could not empathize with the individuals around them. They only saw the world around themselves. And so effectively, they're not necessarily nice people while they're using. They aren't empathetic, they aren't compassionate. So if somebody fell in front of them, they might, instead of just helping them up, actually say, hey, maybe I'll just grab some money off of them or whatever, or do something different. Bottom line is that that individual, when they're cleaned up, is completely a totally different individual. And I have doctors in this practice. I have CEOs. I have pilots. I have people that drive your trains. These are bankers. I mean, totally, functioning, responsible individuals. But when they walked in initially and their mind was hijacked by the substance, as I told each one of them, I'm like, I see you right now. I can tell you're impaired. And let me tell you something, when you're cleaned up, you're going to be a completely different individual. And well, the person I am seeing right now, and the people that see you as you are right now, who have come to really dislike you for what you're doing, will basically not even recognize you when you're on a good program.
So let's and that's why I wanted to have you on my show, because there's going to be a lot of professional people listening to this that I want them to hear this, because there is help out there. There's not just one path, AA, or, you don't need to go be labeled and go down that road. There are other solutions like Dr. Sendi, and I recommend anybody to talk to Chris Sendi here, because he has a completely different perspective of this. That's truly helpful. So rehab, let's talk about that, because that was another kind of road that I was looking towards, like, I've got to check myself in. I was like thinking Ben Affleck, I'm going to go be Ben Affleck and go check myself in. And that was another thing that I was going to, so what are your thoughts about that path?
Yeah. So detox has specific purposes, and it has to be a route to something else. You have to look at, first of all, what you consider addiction to be. Do you consider it to be a choice, or do you consider it to be a disease? And that's the big question. And I ask that question every time somebody comes in, the very first time I see them. And a lot of times, like, well, they consider it a choice, a moral failing, because effectively that's what you're saying, if you're considered disease a choice. Or is it an actual physical disease? And really, it is actually initially a choice to use a substance, but it quickly becomes a disease. And the disease basically is a disease of the ability to make decisions and choosing. It actually, alcohol and opioids and a number of other drugs actually hijack food reward pathways within your brain, and a number of other pathways that are critical for our decision making. And so people don't really think that you could have a disease of your ability to decide things, even if you're not using substances. But it's true, actually, you can. And the argument has been held that decision making can be a disease process in and of itself, or become disease because of things that we do to our brains. And so, that said, and New England Journal actually addressed this with an article about a year ago regarding addiction being a decision making disease. And so I always tell patients the same thing, that once you have gone down the pathway where you have etched into your brain, and your brain has been hijacked by substances, it is no longer a choice. It's not a moral failing. It is actually 100% a disease process. So if you're going to call it a disease process, treat it like a disease. And you do a combination of things to treat this. You have to have everything from psychology, psychiatry type interventions, just to retrain your brain to regain the tools back again in your toolbox to deal with the daily events that you otherwise have not been dealing with when you're using. The second part would be basically a healthier lifestyle, including exercising well, eating well. And again, those are very vague statements right there, but they could talk for hours on that, because that's also part of my practice as well. The other thing is medication support. You cannot treat a disease process, most disease process, without some form of intervention, usually medical related. So if you're going to call it a disease process like diabetes, people are perfectly fine taking medications like insulin and pills for those. If you're going to call alcoholism or opioid use disorder a disease process, and it's a disorder of decision making as a result of using, then if there's medications available that will change that route, then certainly they should be looked into and used. And there are lots of great medications out there. So if anybody goes to a detox unit and they go for the simple reason to detox off to nothing, and that's their plan, is I'm going to be virtuous and be on no medications at all. That would be like saying I'm a diabetic and I'm just going to, basically not take my insulin and not exercise and not do all the other things to basically treat my diabetes. Or if I had a heart attack, I'm not going to take my aspirin, which I know will save my life in the long run, because, it's a choice. I had a choice to have a heart attack. No, it doesn't work that way. I had a choice to become an alcoholic. You didn't. You didn't have a choice to become opiate addiction individual. None of those are choices. They are a combination of basically human beings being introduced to substances that were really never available in our environment historically. Yes, there was, in the distant past, yes, the evidences of, alcohol and substances that would alter the mind, but addictions, just didn't exist like that. And so the bottom line is that everybody who has any type of addiction type process should have medication support, because it works. And we know it works for opiate addiction. We know that it works well for alcoholism. And there's quite a few other scenarios where it works in as well. But when people go into detox, and let's say opiate addiction, if you're addicted to heroin and you go to detox and you detox to nothing, the chances of you dying are significantly higher than if you get on medication support. And why is that? Because when somebody detoxes off of opiates, the cravings that they have for this substance and the impairment is so severe for that craving. I'll give an example of craving. For somebody who is listening who has never really quite understood that whole concept of craving. If I marched you across the desert for 3 days without any water, and then at the end of that march, I had a table there with a good giant glass of water with ice inside of it. And I said, okay, there's your water, but you can't drink it for 30 minutes. I mean, that's craving. You would not be able to tolerate 30 minutes, even though you're not going to die in 30 minutes. But that would be a description of, a craving for the average individual, is that kind of scenario. The same thing would be, much like, I don't know if you remember the Stanford donut experiments back in the 70s, where they took 5-year-olds and they sat them down without breakfast in front of a donut. And they told the children, okay, if you can just not eat this donut for 5 minutes, until I come back, I'll give you a second donut. And they would leave the room, the adults would, they'd leave the kid in there with this donut, which was really savory looking, awesome sweetness. And about 85% of the kids could not prevent themselves from taking a bite out of that donut or licking it or doing something, some sort of fantasizing and creating in their mind, how they're going to enjoy this donut. But they would have gotten a second donut if they could just wait 5 minutes more. And again, that's the craving mind. And the thing is that if you go on to detox completely, how long can you spend with a craving mind when there's all this availability of that substance around you? It would be like, you come out of detox, right? And whether, let's say you're overweight and you go to a overweight detox, I'm just making that up, but then I put you into a candy store, which was your weak spot. How long can you sit in that candy store with all that stuff around you, screaming at you? I got, candy here and there's sweets over there. It's just a matter of time. It's just like that glass of water at the end of the march. And so the thing is, it's the same thing with anything that's lifestyle changes. It has to be something that you could have a sustainable response to. So it's like people who come into my weight loss side of my clinic. You can't just tell them to eat less and exercise more. It doesn't work that way for them. And for weight loss, they have to have a good lifestyle measures and medication support a lot of time in those cases. The same thing when it comes to opiates and alcoholism. And there is a lot of great medications. So the key to any detox is to lower your needs of alcohol to zero, so that you don't have withdrawals like DTs and seizures and those types of things. Those are my biggest fears. and then to dissect out the medical conditions that have accrued, because a lot of people, when they first come in, it turns out they're diabetic and hypertensive, they just haven't sought treatment. And to make certain those medical conditions are stabilized, and then they walk in the office, and then we make certain we put them on great medications that prevent them from having cravings. And then you give them the AA support, the NA support. And a lot of that has to do with structure. If we go back to the whole thing I said originally, the kiss of death for the majority of people when it comes to any addiction is lack of structure and boredom and
Yeah.
loneliness. And they all kind of fit hand in hand. And when you really dissect down individuals who have the biggest problems, they don't have great structured time. They're up late at night and they don't really have a plan for what they're going to do at 2 and 3 in the morning. And of course, they're again sitting in a world that's silent, and the only thing that's screaming to them is alcohol, opiates, Percocet, heroin, whatever it might be. And that's our weakest time.
Nothing good happens at that time of night. Nothing good happens at that.
Nothing ever after
Get your
midnight.
ass to bed before 10, right?
Correct.
Get
Correct.
your ass to bed. And I mean, like, drinking does not help you go to sleep. That it does not work. It just promotes the problem worse and worse and worse. But of course, your drinking brain will not tell you that. Your drinking brain is like, this is the best thing ever for you.
Correct. And that's part of the hijacking of it, because
Right.
you can't see it for what it is. And that's the other thing. It's like, I can't sleep without that drink at night. And I'm like, but what time do you wake up after you drink? 3 in the morning. And it's like, so what do you do then? Take another drink. And I'm
Yeah.
like, how'd that work out in the end? Because the reality is that
It's the cycle.
it's a cycle. Correct. And a lot of times with alcoholism, what it is about alcohol use is that a lot of people, like, I can cut my drinking back anytime I want. Again, the introspection, the ability to see yourself for what's going on disappears over time, and it gets worse as the years go on of drinking. Periods of heavy drinking mixed with periods of minimal to no drinking, and again, each time they drink heavily, they accrue more and more medical problems. They do more and more concussions to their brain. And so they can make worse and worse decisions as they go along. And they actually become demented in a lot of ways, frontal lobe dementia. They can talk just like you and I are talking, but then their decision making is just horrible. It's like, it's like, it's cold outside. And they're like, yeah, I agree with you. And then they walk out without a coat. And an hour later, like, I'm cold. And it's like, well, it's because you weren't able to really think about your future possibilities by your actions as a result of the drinking. And this is worse in women than men, actually, because women will accrue medical problems significantly faster at a similar rate of drinking than men will. And that's a result of basically them having less alcohol dehydrogenase in their stomach. They don't break down alcohol as quickly as men do in their stomach. And so as a result of that, a small drink actually gets absorbed a lot quicker in their bloodstream. So they get drunker quicker, and they accrue a lot of liver problems and cirrhosis as a result of that a lot faster.
Well, this is fascinating stuff, and you and I have had many, 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 many hours of conversations about this. And I wanted to have you. I've been talking about having you on my show for a long time, and thank you very much for jumping on here. I know you're a busy guy, and I just want to thank you for helping me. It is a journey. It is not a sprint or a marathon. It is a lifelong journey. It's interesting because I remember having a conversation with my wife about the drinking in general. And it was interesting perspective about what she said about, well, you can make the decision to be a non-drinker. Here's how she said it. You can make the decision to be a drinker and just drink, and you'll be dead or kill somebody or be in jail or all, there's no good that's just going to happen just by accepting being a drinker and just because you're just going to go down the cliff. Or you can decide to be a non-drinker and have an occasional slip and deal with that and then get back up on the horse. And that's my decision has been the latter, I decided to be a non-drinker. And yeah, I slip up. I tell you about that. I call you up and I slipped up again, man, because life happens and I get caught up. And for all those things that you talked about, it's not easy. I've got a lot of support from you and from others, and it's very disappointing when that happens, but I'm human. But I get back up on that horse and I try again. I'm not going to give up. I'm not going to just go down that road of failure. And I just want to tell everybody that's listening to this to have the strength, like I did, because those of you that know me and have known me and know Bad Kirk, know who that person is in me. If talk to Dr. Sendi. I'm going to give you his number right now. It's 703-844-0184. He does telemedicine. You don't need to be here. You can call him up on the phone. You do telemedicine, right, doctor?
Yeah, correct. I do, yes.
Yeah. Obviously, I encourage you, if you're here locally, to go see him. He's, you're doing this 100% of the time. He's not working it. He's dedicated everything to this now.
Yeah, about 2 months ago, actually, I transitioned. So right on Thanksgiving, I made the decision, gave my 90 days for the ER, and it just kind of aligned with the whole COVID situation, interestingly enough. Very bizarre, but yeah, correct. And so, we do a lot of, on-label and off-label therapies in the office, for all our types of different addictions and treatment plans. We treat, pure mental health disorders as well, depression, suicidal patients. And we get the worst of the worst when it comes to treatment-resistant depression. I mean, people that have gone through every medicine that's out there, TMS, ECT, that's shock therapy for the brain, and who come to us for, the specific treatments, in particular ketamine treatments. And then also, when it comes to off-label therapies for opioid and alcohol use disorder, and even cocaine use disorder and marijuana use disorder. And we integrate that with also, supplements as well. We have an evidence-based approach to supplement use. And I don't sell supplements in the office. I send an email with links to Amazon. But basically, we use nutrigenomics, which is basically genetic-oriented approaches to choices for natural substances that can basically increase health, decrease cravings, and increase cognition, all of which are based in medical-based evidence. Yeah, basically we're trying to incorporate all lifestyle things that basically allow us to kind of improve ourselves, even beyond just stopping the substance.
He's like the doctor that you always wanted, like bedside manner, a guy that you can talk to, that it's not like pushing you out of the office because he's trying to see the next patient. So he is the doctor that everybody has been looking for. So I 100% recommend him. And I thank him every time I see him. You saved my life, Dr. Sendi.
I appreciate
it so much, buddy. And I'll see you tomorrow.
Okay. But you're definitely an inspiration to me. I have to say that I have been thoroughly just impressed, and with your entire outlook on things and perspectives. It's been very very educational to me. And again, I learn a lot from everybody that I see. Every client that comes in has something to teach me. And I came to recognize a long time ago that I'm very ignorant of what I'm ignorant of. And so, again, I don't even know what questions to ask a lot of the times. And so I learn each time. And so, yes, you have certainly taught me a lot in even my own practice.
All right. Well, thanks, buddy. All right, man. Well, thank you very much for being on the show. Chris Sendi, thank you so much. Everybody, it's been Tom Foster on the World of Marketing. And if you need help, Dr. Sendi, 703-844-0184. I'm not even going to tell you the website. Don't go there. Later on, I'll tell you the website because we'll be working. All right, buddy. Thank you so much, Chris. I'll see you tomorrow. Everybody, see you soon.